Hi everyone, it's Alicia and welcome back to my playwriting series. Today I'm going to be answering a question that I was asked on the Author Tubers Facebook page, and that is, what is the difference between writing a stage play and writing a novel or another work of fiction? And the first thing, and the most obvious, is that a stage play is meant to be performed by actors as opposed to just being read by a reader. Although there are some plays that are meant to be read, some playwrights write plays that are meant to be read in the same way you would read a novel. I believe those plays are called closet dramas or closet plays, if I remember right. But most plays are meant to be performed as opposed to simply just read. Although anyone who's gone through high school literature classes or is going through them probably has had to read some sort of theatrical work, whether it's Shakespeare. Shakespeare's the most popular. Like in 9th grade, you might read Romeo and Juliet. 10th grade, I know in my 10th grade class we read Julius Caesar, those sorts of things. So there are certain plays that are considered classics and that are read and studied as works of literature. But typically plays are meant to be performed as opposed to being read. And so as a playwright, you'll want to keep that in mind. You don't want to have any big, lengthy passages of either stage directions, although I'm completely guilty of that, or big, giant monologues, although I'm also guilty of that. I'm old school. I love a good old-fashioned soliloquy where a character will speak an aside, which means they speak dialogue or a monologue that other characters aren't meant to hear, and they turn and face the audience, either addressing it to them by breaking the fourth wall, meaning they speak directly to the audience and directly address them or involve them somehow in the play, or they simply turn and face the audience as a visual cue, so we know, oh, they're not speaking to a character, we're hearing their inner thoughts or their perspective on things that other characters aren't supposed to hear, but we as the audience are meant to hear them. And also, another thing to watch out for and to keep in mind with plays being meant to be performed and not read is you really want to study and master how to write expositional dialogue really well. And what exposition is it's information conveying information to the audience that the characters already know, but doing it in a way that doesn't seem obvious. For instance, if two characters walk into a scene and are meeting each other, you wouldn't have them start going, "Hello, my friend that I've known for 5 years. How are you? How have you been since we've graduated college?" Because we haven't seen each other since then. If you spoke to a friend like that, your friend would go, "Yeah, I already know that." So it's finding ways to convey information that characters already know, but the audience needs to know. So you might have the character say, "Oh, hi, Becky, how have you been since graduation? I've been doing blah, 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 etc., etc. What have you been up to? We haven't really chatted or spoken since then." That's a good way to convey to audience certain passages of time, what the characters, when was their last interaction, what they've been up to. Furthermore, in a novel, as I'm sure you know if you're working on a manuscript, every chapter has to move the story along in some way. Whether it's a character realizing something about themselves or other characters, or whether it moves the story along another way through time or through some other sort of progression, every chapter has to have a purpose. You don't want to have any sense of filler in your book, in your manuscript. And the same goes for writing a play. Maybe even more so, because novels have the time and the luxury to slow down, to really build up the atmosphere. But with plays, you only have your audience for a certain number of time, whether it's a one act, a 10-minute play, a full-length play that can be anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. So you want to treat each scene, I was always taught, treat each scene like a little mini story with a beginning, middle, and end, that the characters should end up somewhere differently from where they started at the beginning of a scene. Even if it's a scene where the story doesn't progress along in the sense of time or a really big event, it could be a scene where the audience learns something that certain characters don't, or the characters learn something about themselves. It doesn't have to be moving the story along at lightning speed and rushing through scenes. It could be smaller revelations, but there should be some sort of progression through each scene. And there are no accidental details or meaningless details in a script. Every detail matters. The most important of these would be what's known as the Chekhov's gun rule, which comes from Russian playwright Anton Chekhov, who he used to say, if you introduce a gun in the beginning of the first act or somewhere in the first act, it needs to go off by the second act. So in other words, if you introduce an element into a script, any element, it doesn't have to be as violent as a gun, that element has to have a certain payoff. You can't introduce something and not have it pay off, or just have a random detail there just for funsies. Every detail matters. But again, I'm sure most people who work on fiction know that, because that applies in novels a lot too. There are no accidental details or meaningless details. Every detail counts. Everything that the audience's attention is drawn to has to have a reason for it being there in the script, and for the audience being made to take notice of it. And lastly, the most important part of a play is the inciting incident, which is the event or the circumstance or the revelation that kicks off the whole rest of the story. So for instance, take the story of Little Red Riding Hood. The inciting incident would be Little Red Riding Hood's grandmother is sick, and so her mother packs her a basket of goodies to take to her grandmother. It's the event that sparks Little Red Riding Hood on her journey, and without her grandmother being ill, the story wouldn't be what it is. So that's the inciting incident, is what propels your characters forward to start undertaking the actions that set the rest of the story in motion. Now, the inciting incident isn't to be confused with one of the most fundamental questions of starting a play, whether it's the overarching theme of an act or both acts, or the overarching theme of a scene, but it's a question that you should ask yourself as the playwright all throughout the writing process. And that is, why is this day unlike any other? Why is the play starting now when it is? Because when writing a play, the characters aren't just emerging onto the stage completely brand new. They've had entire lifetimes before the story that's being told. So why is the play focusing on this amount of time, these events, these days, this window of time in the characters' lives? Why is this day unlike any other day? So for instance, going back to Little Red Riding Hood, maybe she's brought homemade goodies to her grandmother before when she's sick or when she just needs a pick-me-up, but this day is unlike any other because she meets a talking wolf who tries to eat her. That's a pretty unique set of circumstances and would be a day that she would remember the rest of her life. So it's important to remember things like that. Why are your characters going through what they're going through, and why are you, the playwright, focusing on telling the story that you're telling right now? Because you could pick any moment from your characters' lives, but letting the audience know through dialogue and stage directions and world building why you're choosing this particular window out of their lives to bring to life is pretty much one of the fundamental questions of playwriting. And it's why playwriting is unlike novel writing, because novels can pretty much be as long as you want and cover as much of the characters' lives as you want to as the author. But as the playwright, again, you only have a certain amount of time to convey your story to the audience. And so those are the things that I think set apart playwriting from novel writing or other forms of fiction writing. But I may have missed a few, or I may think of others in the future. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them in the comments below, and I will be happy to answer them. Thank you for watching, happy writing, and blessed be.